In this video, we'll learn about using MARI's node graph in basic mode. Alright, great. So I've got a very basic project open here, again with our Assassin asset, but there are no textures yet. As a matter of fact, I have not even created a shader inside this project. It just simply has a diffuse channel with a single base layer inside of it. Now I want to go ahead and pin that down. We're going to need access to this, but I wanted to tell you that inside of MARI 3, we now have a powerful new way to texture. It's called a node graph, and if you've ever used, most 3D applications have some sort of a node graph built into them. Now, this is a completely different mindset to texturing, so if you're used to the layer-based approach, something like Photoshop has, then you may not want to experiment with this just yet. But for some artists that come from a node background, this is going to be something they gravitate to because their minds have already sort of adapted to this way of thinking. So let's go ahead and talk about the first of two ways that the node graph has been implemented here inside of MARI. The first mode is called basic mode, and this mode simply works with node graph layers. So before I create one of those layers, I'm just going to come over here and open up a couple of palettes that'll be useful for us. We'll open up the node graph palette, and you can see there's some verbiage here about basic and advanced mode, and then we'll open up the node properties palette. Now, it just so happens that I have them both docked down here, which is perfectly acceptable for this example. So let's go ahead and jump over into this layer stack and create our first node graph layer. Simply by clicking on this button right here, you'll notice a layer gets added above my base layer, and it is a node graph. You can see this little node graph icon here. Now, you'll also notice that over here inside my node graph palette, the view's changed. We now have an input and an output. So basically, there's really nothing inside this graph as of yet, but we can absolutely add nodes to this. Before we add any, I want to show you how to sort of navigate around in the node graph. It's a little different than most other applications that I've experienced, but you can middle click to pan. You can use your scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom in and out. And then your right click will access this contextual menu where you can access file commands, edit commands, as well as all the nodes. So let's go ahead and start to create some nodes here. We'll go ahead and drop in something simple. Let's just use a basic color node. There we go. I've created that color node. We can select it and move it around. We can deselect it. You can kind of see what that looks like. Now, we can't really see what this node is doing because it's not connected yet inside of our node graph. Now, we need to run a pipe from this color node down to this output node. We can simply do that by clicking on this little arrowhead right here, dragging out our pipe, and then releasing it on the output. And you can see that my mesh changed to a white color over here. Now, in order to access the properties for this particular node, we need to make sure we double click on that. Then we can come over to our node properties, and we can make a change to the color here. Let's change this color to something like a deep red. There we go. Fantastic. You can see that change has been reflected on the model there. So this is a really powerful way to work, again, because you can build really complex node graphs into a single layer here inside your layer stack. So let's go ahead and start to maybe think about what else we could do here. Let's maybe come in here and simply disconnect this wire by clicking on it and dragging it away from the output. And I'm going to actually come over here and name this something like red. That way we know which node is creating which color. Now, another way you can create a node here is to hit the Tab key, and that'll bring up this dialog where we could come in and search for a node like color, and we could select it and hit enter and drop it in. So we'll just come over here, and you can see both nodes here are visible. We can come in and call this one something like, let's just give it a color first before we name it. We'll just come in and give this, I don't know. Let's give it kind of a pale green color here, something like that. Something that will contrast well with that red. And we'll name it green. Great. So we have two procedural color nodes here. Now we need to combine them or merge them. So the node we will want to use for this, we can come over here under the layer subcategory. You'll find this merge node. Now this merge node gets dropped in here, and it doesn't have any connections yet, but I'm going to delete that because I want to show you another way we can do this. I'm going to select that red node first. And we'll come in, right-click, Nodes, Layer, and Merge. And notice what happened now. That red node was created as a connection to this new merge node. So you can absolutely create connections for new nodes just simply by making sure you have the correct or corresponding nodes selected when you create the node. So this particular merge node has a base and an over input as well as a mask input. So if we come in and connect the green color procedural there, and then we connect the merge node to the output, what you'll see here is just a green, pale green color. That's because we don't have a mask yet here. So let's go ahead and give it a mask. We'll just use a simple procedural, and I'm going to grab this oil right here under miscellaneous. I know that's outside the recording area, but you can see here what happened. I mistakenly had a node selected in that merge node when I created this node. So we need to come in and maybe disconnect some of these guys. Move this up and over, connect our merge node back up to the output, and great. So we have this oil node, and notice it has an input. So if we had position data, we could absolutely feed that into the oil. I'm not going to utilize that. I'm just going to simply connect my oil to the mask here. And you can see what happens. If we were to zoom in on this, we now have sort of modulated that color, actually between the two colors, red and green, just simply using this oil procedural. Now with that node selected, we could come over and begin to adjust things like size, organic, anything that you may be accustomed to using inside that procedural is still available to you here inside of the node properties window. Now I also want to show you something else. Let's come in here and disconnect some of these nodes. Because sometimes when you're making the very first connection, let's say we wanted to connect this mask up. We'll just drag it and drop it over. You'll get this little dialog that pops up that says, okay, you want to make a connection to the merge node. It has these three inputs. Which one do you want to connect the oil node to in this case? We could say mask. Go ahead and do the same thing for this. We'll select over. And we'll select base. And there we go. So we've now created a series of nodes that is creating a very specific look here. So I want to just simply drag this down a little bit because this is, again, something where we can start to build fairly complex node graphs here inside of a single layer. So what if we wanted to use that red and green pattern for areas that maybe are her clothes but not her skin? Well, let's come over here and just take this, move it over a bit. We'll come over and create another basic color node here. Give it sort of a skin color. And we'll call this something like skin. All right, great. So we've got both of the areas, and now we want to combine them. So again, we're going to use a merge node. And you can see that node has been connected. I'm actually going to connect it to the over. And instead of connecting this series of nodes to the base, which we absolutely could do, what we could do if we wanted to maybe take these nodes right here and repurpose them or sort of consolidate them is we could select them and we could create a group out of them. We can simply hit Control G, or we can right click on that group and simply select this group option. And that will consolidate all of those nodes into a single node called group. Now we can double click on this group at any time to actually go inside of it and make changes to it. In fact, most of these nodes probably look very familiar because we just created them. Let's actually close out of the group, jump over here and name the group something like green red. There we go. And we'll go ahead and just use that and come over and connect it up here. Now at this point we will still need a mask, but if we go ahead and connect that to the output, what you're going to see here is this skin color. Now at this point, the whole reason I did this was so we could assign one color to the skin and then this red and green undulating pattern to all of the other areas. So I'm going to come in, right click, and create what's known as a paint node. We can simply tap the P key or select that paint option, and you'll see that MARI is asking us some questions about this paint node. Things like what resolution do we want it to be, the bit depth, the file space, and even the default fill color for that node. I'm going to go ahead and make sure we select black here, because this is going to be a mask, and I want it to hide all of this skin color here. And we'll go ahead and connect that up as the mask. Now at this point, with this paint node selected, we can actually come in here and paint into it. So if I wanted to, I could come in here and paint white, and we could start to reveal some of this skin. Or, in the case of this asset, we could simply come in and maybe select both the head and the body mesh. Under the Patches menu, come over to Fill, and just fill those with white. Alright, great, there we go. So we've started to create a pretty interesting look here, all inside of a single graph layer. Now, my recommendation for you would be that go ahead and stick with this basic mode for the node graph if you plan on working sort of back and forth between this node graph approach and a layer-based approach to texturing. If I wanted to come in and add some additional layers over it here and maybe paint onto those layers, we absolutely could do that. But if you prefer to stick strictly to this node-based approach to texturing, then check out my next video. We'll talk about the advanced mode for the node graph in our next video.